The champagne in Elena's glass was vintage, the diamonds around her neck were flawless, and her husband's smile was the most charming thing in the room, until she saw the text message that turned her perfect marriage into a perfect lie. It wasn't a sordid confession or a nude photo. It was a simple domestic grocery list sent to a man who claimed he was on a solo business trip, proving that intimacy isn't just about sex, but about who you share the mundane with. In that split second, the glittering facade of the Sterling Empire cracked, revealing that perhaps there was more than one woman answering to her name. If you find yourself drawn to the silence before the storm, where intuition screams louder than words and the most dangerous secrets are hidden in plain sight, stay with me. We are just peeling back the first layer of this beautiful, devastating deception. The silence in the Sterling penthouse was not empty. It was expensive. It was the kind of hush that only triple-paned glass and 42nd floor elevation could buy, filtering out the chaotic hum of Manhattan until the city below looked like nothing more than a silent, moving circuit board. Elena Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite, fastening a diamond earring. The gem caught the recessed lighting, flashing a cold, brilliant white. Behind her, the reflection of the room was a study in minimalism, Italian leather, brushed steel, and a palette of grays that suggested a life devoid of dust or error. Do you prefer the black tie or the midnight blue? Elena turned. Julian was standing in the doorway of the walk-in closet, holding 2 strips of silk. He looked, as he always did, impeccable. At 45, Julian Sterling possessed the kind of rugged architectural handsomeness that graced the covers of design magazines. He was the man who built skyscrapers that defied gravity, and he wore his success like a second skin. "The midnight blue," Elena said, her voice soft. "It brings out the coldness in your eyes." Julian smiled, taking it as a compliment. He stepped forward, allowing her to loop the silk around his neck. "You're in a mood tonight." "Just tired," she lied. She wasn't tired. She was uneasy. A low-frequency anxiety had been humming in her chest all day, ever since he had returned from his 3-day site visit to Chicago. "The gala is important, Elle," he said, his eyes scanning her face, checking for cracks in her presentation. "The board is voting on the Hudson Yards project next week. I need the donors to see a united front, stability, vision." "I know the script, Julian," she finished the knot, flattening the fabric against his crisp white shirt. "I'm always the perfect prop." He kissed her forehead, a dry, rehearsed gesture. "You're my partner, not a prop." He checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. "I need to take a quick call before we head down. Tokyo time. It's urgent." "Go," she said, turning back to the mirror. He retreated to his study, closing the heavy oak door with a soft click. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She moved to the valet stand where he had dumped the contents of his pockets before changing. A slim leather wallet, a silver money clip, and his secondary phone, the one he used for international clients. It buzzed. Elena froze. The screen lit up for a fraction of a second, then went dark. She knew the rules. They respected each other's privacy. That was the agreement of a modern, mature marriage. But the unease in her chest spiked. Julian was in the study with his main phone. This one was supposed to be off during the weekend. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the device. It buzzed again, a notification. "Be there in 10. Don't forget the inhaler this time." Elena frowned. The message preview vanished, leaving only the lock screen. Time. Inhaler? Julian didn't have asthma. She didn't have asthma. None of their clients, corporate sharks and real estate moguls, would be texting Julian Sterling about pediatric medical supplies at 7:00 p.m. on a Saturday. She glanced at the study door. It remained shut. Against her better judgment, against 5 years of conditioned trust, she picked up the phone. She didn't know the passcode. He changed them monthly for security. But the message had come from a contact saved simply as N. She placed the phone back down, exactly as it had been, aligned with the edge of the wallet. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt vulgar in the quiet room. Chicago. He had been in Chicago for 3 days. Elena walked over to the blazer he had worn home. It was draped over the armchair, smelling faintly of sandalwood and airline recycled air. She slipped her hand into the inside pocket. Usually it would be empty. Julian was fastidious. Her fingers brushed against crumpled paper. She pulled it out. It was a receipt, thermal paper soft and fading. She smoothed it out on the vanity table. Gino's Pizza and Subs. Date, yesterday. Location, Greenwich, CT. Order, 1 large pepperoni, 2 kids' juice boxes. She stared at the text. Yesterday, Julian had sent her a photo of the view from his hotel room in the Loop, Chicago. The metadata on the photo had confirmed it, but paper didn't glitch, paper didn't lie. Julian had been 40 miles away, in a suburb famous for its hedge funds and happy families, buying juice boxes. The study door opened. "All set," Julian announced, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who controlled skylines. He walked into the room, adjusting his cufflinks. "You look breathtaking, Elena, shall we?" Elena slipped the receipt into her clutch, the paper crinkling sharply against the silk lining. She turned to him, her face a mask of porcelain perfection. "Yes," she said, smiling the smile he had paid for. "Let's go." 3 days after the gala, the suitcase was back on the bed. It was the rimless aluminum carry-on Julian preferred for Europe, sleek, impenetrable, and efficient. "London," Julian said, folding a cashmere sweater with practiced precision. "The Shard client again. They're nervous about the structural glazing. I need to hold their hands for a few days." Elena sat on the edge of the chaise lounge, watching him. Usually she would be checking the weather in London for him, suggesting a raincoat or reminding him to visit that bookstore in Notting Hill he liked. Today, she just watched. She looked for a tremor in his hands, a shift in his gaze. There was nothing. He was a master builder, after all. His foundation was solid. "When is your flight?" she asked. "Red-eye, 9:00 p.m. out of JFK. He zipped the case shut. The sound was sharp, like a zipper closing on a body bag. He walked over, leaned down, and kissed her. It was a firm, familiar kiss, tasting of mint and deception. "I'll call you when I land. Don't wait up." "Safe travels," she said. She waited until the elevator doors hissed shut. She waited another 5 minutes until she saw his black sedan merge into the traffic on the avenue below, a tiny metal beetle in a stream of red taillights. Only then did the temperature in the room seem to drop. Elena walked into Julian's study. It smelled of him. Ink, leather, and the faint metallic scent of expensive cologne. She didn't go for his computer. He was too smart for that. His laptop was with him, encrypted and biometrically locked. Instead, she opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet where they kept the mundane administration of their life, property taxes, insurance policies, and vehicle registrations. She pulled out the file labeled Automotive. Julian rarely drove himself within the city, but he kept a vintage Porsche 911 in a garage on the west side for weekend drives to clear his head. It was his pride and joy, a machine of pure engineering. She logged into the EZ-Pass account on her iPad. The screen glowed blue in the dim room. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed in the password, form follows function, a phrase he used in every interview. Access granted. Elena navigated to the Activity and Usage tab. She filtered the dates for the last 6 months, specifically cross-referencing them with the dates Julian had supposedly been in Tokyo, Dubai, and Chicago. The data populated the screen in a neat, undeniable spreadsheet. October 12th, Tokyo trip, 08:14 a.m., Hutchinson River Parkway northbound, 09:20 a.m., I-95 North, Exit 3, Greenwich, CT. November 4th, Dubai conference, 07:30 a.m., I-95 North, Exit 3, Greenwich, CT. Yesterday, Chicago site visit, 06:45 p.m., I-95 South, entering New York. There were no tolls for the Queens Midtown Tunnel toward JFK. There were no charges for long-term airport parking. For the last 6 months, every time Julian Sterling claimed to be crossing oceans, he was simply driving 40 miles north. He wasn't flying to global capitals, he was commuting. Elena felt a wave of nausea roll over her. The receipt for the pizza and the pediatric dentist hadn't been an anomaly. It was a routine. She clicked on the transponder details. The logs showed he usually stayed for 2 or 3 days at a time. He wasn't just visiting someone, he was living there. He was playing house in a zip code known for hedge funds in high schools, while she curated his image in the glass tower he had built for her. She looked at the clock. 8:15 p.m. If he was flying to London, he would be at JFK right now. She refreshed the page. Current activity, 8:12 p.m., Henry Hudson Bridge, northbound. He wasn't going to the airport, he was going north. Elena set the iPad down on the mahogany desk. The cool surface felt grounding against her palms. The silence of the penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was mocking. She wasn't the wife of an international architect. She was the woman he left behind in the city while he went home. She reached for her car keys. The drive north was a blur of sodium lights and asphalt. Elena's hands gripped the leather steering wheel of her Audi until her knuckles turned the color of bone. She didn't listen to music. The only soundtrack was the hum of the tires and the blood rushing in her ears. Greenwich, Connecticut, was a different universe from the steel canyons of Manhattan. Here, the darkness was absolute, broken only by the warm, inviting glow of porch lights and the security floodlights of estates set far back from the road. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves, a scent of aggressive wholesomeness that made Elena's stomach turn. The GPS on her dashboard chirped. Arriving at destination on the right, Elena killed the headlights. She let the car drift forward, tires crunching softly on the gravel shoulder, before coming to a stop beneath the canopy of an ancient oak tree. The house was a mockery of everything Julian claimed to stand for. It was a sprawling colonial white clapboard with black shutters, complete with a wraparound porch and a manicured lawn. It was traditional, sentimental, and cloying, the architectural equivalent of a Hallmark movie. Julian, the man who preached the gospel of brutalism and concrete, who sneered at suburban kitsch, was parking his Porsche in the driveway of a house that belonged on a puzzle box. Elena lowered the window. The silence of the neighborhood was profound. Through the large bay window on the ground floor, the curtains were drawn open, turning the living room into a lit stage. Elena watched, unblinking. Julian was there. He had changed out of his suit. He was wearing a thick cable-knit sweater, something rough and cozy she had never seen before. He looked softer, his posture less rigid than the steel-spined architect she shared a bed with. A woman walked into the frame. She was shorter than Elena, with honey-colored hair tied back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or diamonds. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt. She handed Julian a glass of red wine, and he leaned down to kiss her. It wasn't the chaste, dry peck he gave Elena before Gallus. It was a kiss of familiarity, of comfort. He said something that made the woman laugh, her head thrown back in genuine, unguarded mirth. Then, the movement that stopped Elena's heart. 2 children ran into the room, a boy, perhaps 10, and a girl, much younger, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Julian didn't recoil. He didn't look annoyed by the noise or the chaos. He set his wineglass down on the mantelpiece and crouched. The girl launched herself into his arms, and he caught her effortlessly, swinging her up onto his hip. Elena felt the oxygen leave the car. "We agreed," she whispered to the empty air, her voice cracking. "We agreed. No children." Julian had told her explicitly on their second date that his legacy was his buildings. "Children are a distraction," he had said. "They anchor you to the ground, Elena. I need to fly." But there he was, anchored, rooted. He walked around the living room with the girl on his hip, listening to the boy who was frantically gesturing, likely recounting a school day story. Julian looked attentive. He looked like a father. This wasn't an affair. An affair was a hotel room, a stolen weekend, a physical release. This was a parallel existence. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had bifurcated his soul. In New York, he was the cold, brilliant god of architecture. Here, in this soft-lit room, he was just a dad in a sweater. Elena watched them for 10 minutes. She watched the family dynamic that was seamlessly choreographed, implying years of practice. She watched the woman, Nora, the contact name, touch Julian's arm with a possessive ease that suggested she had no idea Mrs. Sterling existed in Manhattan. Or maybe she did. Elena put the car in reverse. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely shift the gear. She couldn't storm in there, not now. The rage was too cold, too large. If she walked through that door, she wouldn't just scream, she would burn the whole picturesque scene to the ground. She backed out slowly, leaving the perfect family framed in the window, unknowing and safe. As she turned the car back toward the highway, toward the city that felt increasingly like a stage set, Elena realized the most painful truth of all. Julian hadn't just lied about where he was going. He had lied about who he was. And now she had to decide which Mrs. Sterling she was going to be, the victim or the executioner. The penthouse was exactly as she had left it, cold, pristine, and aggressively quiet. When Elena walked in at 2 a.m., the silence felt different. Before, it had felt like exclusivity. Now, it felt like a void. She kicked off her heels near the foyer, not caring that they lay haphazardly on the marble floor, a small, chaotic rebellion against the order Julian prized. She poured herself a glass of water but didn't drink it. Instead, she went straight to her office, a glass-walled room overlooking the dark expanse of the Hudson River. She needed to treat this like an acquisition. In her line of work, provenance was everything. You didn't buy a painting without knowing its history, its previous owners, and its authenticity. She had married Julian without checking the provenance. She opened her laptop, the screen's blue light harsh against her tired eyes. She started with the address in Greenwich, 42 Maplewood Drive, Greenwich, CT. The property records loaded instantly. The house was purchased 14 years ago. The deed was not held in an LLC or a blind trust, as Julian's city assets were. It was listed plainly. Owners, Julian Sterling. And Nora Sterling. Elena stared at the names. There was no remarried footnote, just 2 names bound by property and time. She opened a new tab. She searched for Julian Sterling divorce, Nora Sterling, Connecticut. No results found. She searched for divorce filings in New York. No results found. Her heart began to beat with a heavy, sickening thud. She navigated to the Vital Records Archives, a database she used to verify estate sales. She searched for marriage licenses. There it was. A digital scan of an announcement from the Greenwich Time, dated 15 years ago. Nora Miller weds Julian Sterling. Elena looked at the date. Then she looked at the date on her own marriage certificate, framed discreetly on the bookshelf behind her. 5 years ago. If there was no divorce, then her marriage to Julian, the lavish ceremony in the Hamptons, the feature in Vogue, the legal binding of their assets, was a farce. It was a performance piece. She wasn't the wife. She was the mistress who had been given a ring and a title to keep her quiet. She was the city wife, a luxury item he kept in Manhattan to match his brand, while his real life, his legal life, remained safe in the suburbs. The laptop screen blurred. Elena felt a sudden violent urge to vomit. She had looked down on women who unknowingly dated married men, thinking them naive or willfully blind. She was worse. She was an accomplice to her own erasure. The phone on her desk buzzed, startling her. FaceTime request, Julian. Elena stared at the screen. He was calling. He was supposed to be in London, which meant it would be 7 a.m. there, a reasonable time to call his wife. But he was in Greenwich. It was 2:30 a.m. She took a breath, smoothed her hair, and forced her face into a neutral mask. She accepted the call. Julian filled the screen. He was wearing a white hotel bathrobe, sitting against a headboard that looked generic enough to be anywhere. The lighting was dim. "Morning, darling," he whispered, his voice raspy with sleep. "Just woke up. Wanted to catch you before you went to sleep." Elena looked closely. The background wall was beige. There was no window visible. He was likely in the guest room or the basement of the Greenwich house. "How is London?" Elena asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow, distant. "Rainy. Gray," Julian lied effortlessly. "I miss the view from our bedroom. I miss you." "Do you?" She didn't blink. "Of course. I'm dreading this meeting. I just want to be home." "You are home," she thought. "You're 40 miles away, probably down the hall from your children." "You look tired, Elle," Julian noted, tilting the phone. "Is everything okay?" "Just a headache," she said. "I've been looking at old records for the gallery." "Don't work too hard. You're the face of the brand, remember? I need you radiant." "The face of the brand," she repeated. That's all she was. A logo, a front, I have to jump in the shower, he said. I'll call you tonight. Love you. Goodbye, Julian. The screen went black. Elena sat in the dark office for a long time. She looked at the property deed on her screen, then at the black mirror of her phone. Julian thought he was managing two separate worlds, keeping them perfectly parallel so they would never touch. He was wrong. She wasn't going to just verify the provenance anymore. She was going to meet the previous owner. When the elevator doors opened 2 days later, Julian walked in with the weary, purposeful stride of a man who had just crossed the Atlantic. He carried his garment bag over one shoulder and a duty-free bag in his hand. Home, he exhaled, dropping the bags on the foyer bench. God, the customs line at JFK was a nightmare. 2 hours just to get to the passport control. Elena stood in the archway of the living room, holding a glass of Chardonnay. She watched him. She looked for the telltale signs of a transatlantic flight, the red-rimmed eyes, the dehydrated skin, the subtle disarray of clothing. There were none. His skin was fresh, likely from the Connecticut air. His eyes were clear. He didn't look like a man who had spent 7 hours in pressurized, recycled air. He looked like a man who had slept in a king-sized bed in the suburbs. Poor thing, Elena said, her voice smooth as glass. She walked over and offered her cheek for a kiss. He smelled of soap, brand generic bar soap, not the Aesop wash provided in the first-class lounge. I brought you something, he said, reaching into the duty-free bag. He pulled out a box of truffles from Harrods. Elena took the box. It was the standard tourist gift. He must keep a stash of these in his office or the trunk of his car for exactly this purpose. You shouldn't have, she said. Did you get a chance to sleep on the flight? A few hours. I took a pill. He loosened his tie, walking past her toward the bar. Pour me a drink? Scotch? Neat? Elena moved to the crystal decanter. As she poured the amber liquid, she decided to pull the first thread. I was watching the news, she said casually, her back to him. They said there was a massive storm over the Atlantic. Terrible turbulence for all the flights coming in from London. The liquid in the glass didn't tremble. She listened to the silence behind her. It was bumpy, Julian said after a beat. The pilot did a good job, but yes, the service was suspended for the first hour. Elena turned around and handed him the glass. There had been no storm. The weather over the Atlantic had been perfectly clear for the last 24 hours. I missed you, he said, taking a sip and looking at her with that practiced intensity that usually made her knees weak. Now, it just looked like a technique. The hotel was lonely. Which hotel did they put you in again? She asked. The Langham? The Connaught, he corrected. Quickly. Better location for the meetings. Right, the Connaught. She took a sip of her wine. I remember their room service. Did you have the English breakfast? Twice, he smiled. Greasy but nostalgic. Elena smiled back. It was a terrifying sensation, smiling at a man she now knew was a stranger. He was constructing this reality brick by brick, just like his buildings, an imposing facade with nothing behind it but empty space. You know, Elena said, stepping closer, picking a piece of lint off his lapel, I was thinking we should do something different this weekend. Get out of the city. Julian stiffened imperceptibly. Oh, where were you thinking? Upstate? Or maybe Connecticut? She let the word hang in the air, watching his pupils. I heard Greenwich is beautiful this time of year. The leaves, the quiet. Julian didn't blink, but his hand tightened around the Scotch glass. Greenwich? It's a bit suburban for us, isn't it? Stifling. I was thinking maybe the Hamptons house. I need the ocean. Of course, Elena said, stepping back. The ocean sounds perfect. He drained his drink. I'm going to unpack. Then I have some emails to catch up on. Go ahead, she said. As he walked toward the bedroom, Elena's gaze fell to his shoes. They were his black Oxfords. But on the heel of the left shoe, caught in the groove of the leather, was a tiny telltale blade of dried grass. There was no grass in the first-class cabin of British Airways. There was no grass in the lobby of the Connaught. Elena set her glass down. The game had officially begun. He thought he was the architect of this life, controlling the angles and the light. He didn't realize that she was no longer the inhabitant. She was the demolition crew. Elena did not wear her wedding ring. She had left the 5-carat emerald-cut diamond sitting on the marble vanity in Manhattan, a heavy, glittering accusation left behind in the silence. For this trip to Greenwich, she wore simple slacks, a cashmere sweater in a neutral beige, and oversized sunglasses. She looked wealthy, but anonymous, just another city woman drifting through the suburbs on a Tuesday morning. She had tracked Nora to a small, upscale home goods and antique boutique on Greenwich Avenue called Heirloom. According to the social media digging Elena had done, Nora worked there 3 days a week. It was a hobby job, the kind meant to fill the empty hours while the children were at school and the husband was away. The bell above the door chimed softly as Elena stepped inside. The shop smelled of beeswax, dried lavender, and old paper. It was cluttered but cozy, a stark contrast to the sterile white wall minimalism of the gallery Elena ran in Chelsea. "Good morning," a voice called out from the back. Elena froze. It was the voice she had heard through the window. Nora stepped out from behind a display of vintage linens. Up close, she was prettier than Elena had expected, but also more tired. There were fine lines around her eyes that the distance of the driveway had hidden. She wore no makeup, and her hands, resting on a stack of quilts, looked capable and rough. "Hi," Elena said, forcing a smile that felt tight on her face. "I'm just browsing, looking for a gift." "Take your time," Nora said warmly. "We just got some beautiful ceramic pitchers in from France. If you need anything, I'm Nora." "Thank you, Nora. I'm Claire." Elena moved through the aisles, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She picked up a heavy ceramic bowl, feeling its weight. This was Julian's other life, this texture, this warmth, this woman. She circled back to the counter where Nora was pricing items. "It's quiet today," Elena observed, placing the bowl on the counter. "Tuesdays usually are," Nora said, punching the price into the register. "It gives me time to think. My kids are in school, so it's my only quiet time." "And your husband?" Elena asked. The question was a razor blade wrapped in casual conversation. "Is he at work?" Nora sighed, a small, resigned sound. "He's traveling, again. He's always traveling." Elena gripped the edge of the counter. "That must be hard. My husband travels a lot, too. Business." Nora looked up, her eyes softening with instant camaraderie. "Then you know exactly what it's like. The empty side of the bed, the dinners for one. He says he does it for us, for the family, but sometimes," she trailed off, looking out the window at the passing cars, "sometimes I feel like I'm married to a ghost who sends paychecks." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Julian had told Elena that his ex-wife, who didn't exist, was demanding and cold. He had painted a picture of a woman who didn't understand his genius, but standing here was a woman who was simply lonely. "What does he do?" Elena asked, pushing the knife deeper. "If you don't mind me asking." "He's in construction management," Nora said, "consulting for big commercial projects. Boring stuff, really. He hates talking about it when he gets home. He says he just wants to shut the world out." Elena nearly laughed out loud, a hysterical bubble rising in her throat. Construction management. Julian Sterling, the visionary architect who was profiled in Architectural Digest as a sculptor of skylines, had reduced himself to a construction manager to keep his suburban wife in the dark. He wasn't just lying to Elena about Nora, he was lying to Nora about his entire identity. "He sounds private," Elena said. "He is," Nora agreed, wrapping the bowl in tissue paper. "He hates social media, hates photos. He says privacy is the only luxury left. Because if you saw a photo of him at a gala in New York," Elena thought, "you'd see me standing next to him." "You have a lovely family, I'm sure," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. Nora smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I do. They're my whole world. Julian, my husband, he's a good father when he's here. I just wish..." She paused, handing Elena the bag. "I just wish he was here more. But we make it work. Marriage is about compromise, right?" "Right," Elena whispered. "Compromise." She took the bag. Her fingers brushed Nora's for a fleeting second. The contact was electric, a connection between two women unknowingly sharing the same man. "Enjoy the bowl, Claire," Nora said. "Thank you," Elena said. She turned and walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the street. She walked 2 blocks before she had to stop and lean against a brick wall, breathing hard. Nora wasn't a villain. She wasn't a seductress who had stolen Julian away. She was a victim of a 15-year con. Julian had built 2 separate towers, and he was the only one with the key to the elevator between them. Elena looked at the antique bowl in her bag. She wasn't going to just leave Julian now. Leaving was too easy. Julian had destroyed Nora's reality with lies. Elena decided she would destroy his reality with the truth, but she would do it on the grandest stage possible. The venue was Julian's own creation. The Apex, a soaring glass atrium in Hudson Yards that felt more like a cathedral than an event space. 600 of New York's cultural elite filled the room, a sea of black ties and couture gowns swirling under the suspended geometric chandeliers. Elena stood near the stage, wearing a dress of liquid silver that clung to her like armor. She held a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. Her pulse was steady, a flat, cold rhythm. Tonight was not a celebration, it was in demolition. "He looks magnificent, doesn't he?" Elena turned. It was the chairman of the awarding committee, a man whose approval Julian craved like oxygen. "He does," Elena agreed, her eyes fixed on her husband. Julian stood, at the podium, bathed in a spotlight that made him look messianic. He gripped the crystal award with one hand, the other gesturing expansively as he spoke to the hushed crowd. "Architecture is, at its core, about truth," Julian said, his voice resonating through the state-of-the-art acoustics. "We strip away the facade to reveal the structural honesty beneath. We cannot build safely on a lie." A ripple of appreciative applause moved through the room. Elena didn't clap. She checked her watch. 9:15 p.m. The car she had arranged would be pulling up right now. It had been surprisingly easy. An email sent from a generic event coordinator addressed to Nora Sterling in Greenwich. An invitation to a lifetime achievement dinner for her husband's firm. A private car service prepaid. Elena knew Nora wouldn't resist the chance to finally see her private husband honored, especially when the invitation claimed he was too humble to invite her himself. Elena looked toward the massive double doors at the back of the atrium. "I dedicate this award," Julian continued, his voice dipping into a rehearsed register of humility, "to the person who keeps my world standing. My wife." He looked down at Elena. The spotlight swung to her. The crowd applauded. Elena smiled, a sharp, dangerous curving of her lips. She didn't nod. Instead, she slowly turned her head, directing her gaze, and the gaze of those around her, toward the entrance. The doors opened. The security guards, instructed by Elena earlier that a VIP guest was arriving late, stepped aside. Nora stood there. She looked small in the cavernous space. She was wearing a simple navy cocktail dress, tasteful but clearly off the rack, clutching a beaded purse nervously. She looked bewildered by the scale of the event, the blinding lights, the sheer volume of wealth in the room. She scanned the crowd, looking for the construction management dinner. Then she saw the giant screen behind the away stage. It was projecting a live close-up of Julian's face. Nora froze. Her eyes traveled from the screen down to the man at the podium. Julian was mid-sentence. And to the integrity of... His voice died in his throat. It wasn't a pause, it was a malfunction. He stared over the heads of the front row, his eyes locking onto the figure at the back of the room. The color drained from his face so instantly it looked as if the blood had been siphoned out of him. The silence in the room shifted from respectful to confused. "Julian," someone whispered near the stage. Julian gripped the podium, his knuckles white. He looked at Nora, then he looked down at Elena. Elena met his gaze. She raised her champagne glass slightly in a silent toast. "Structure is about truth, isn't it, Julian?" Nora began to walk forward. She moved like a sleepwalker, drawn by the horrific gravity of the situation. As she stepped into the light, people turned. They saw a woman who didn't fit, a woman staring at the visionary of the year with the devastation of a wife recognizing her husband. "Julian?" Nora's voice was faint, but in the acoustically perfect silence of the room, it carried. Julian stepped back from the podium, knocking the crystal award. It tumbled off the slanted surface, hitting the stage floor with a sickening, shattering crash. The sound broke the spell. Whispers erupted like wildfire. iPhones were raised. Elena set her glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The facade was gone. The steel beams had buckled. She turned her back on the stage, on the man who was currently suffocating in the vacuum of his own lies, and began to walk toward the exit. She didn't look at Nora as she passed her. She didn't need to. The wreckage belonged to all of them now. The penthouse looked smaller without the furniture. It was a strange optical illusion. Usually, empty rooms looked larger, but stripped of the Italian leather sofas and the mid-century modern consoles, the space just looked hollow. It was no longer a sanctuary of high design. It was just a glass box suspended in the sky, cold and impersonally bright. Elena taped the final cardboard box shut. The sound of the tape gun was loud, tearing through the quiet that had once oppressed her. She picked up a newspaper from the stack she was using as packing material. The headline was 3 weeks old, but the ink still looked fresh. Sterling Reputation Crumbles, the double life of New York star architect. There was a photo of Julian leaving the courthouse, looking haggard, shielding his face with a folder. He had lost the firm. The board had ousted him 48 hours after the gala. The moral clause in his contract was ironclad, and the humiliation was too public to weather. Nora had filed for divorce in Connecticut the same day Elena filed in New York. The two legal actions were currently strangling him, dismantling his assets brick by brick. Elena crumpled the newspaper and stuffed it into the box, burying the image of her husband. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel anger. She felt a profound, exhausting lightness. "Ms. Vance?" The moving coordinator stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. He used her maiden name effortlessly. It had taken Elena a week to get used to hearing it again. Elena Vance. It sounded less expensive than Elena Sterling, but it sounded real. "The truck is loaded," the man said. "Is this the last of it?" "Yes," Elena said, running her hand over the smooth white wall one last time. "Take it." She didn't look back as she walked to the elevator. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say to Julian. He had called her a dozen times in the first week, leaving voicemail messages that ranged from weeping apologies to blaming her for ruining his life. She had deleted them all unheard. The cab ride to her new apartment took her away from the polished grid of Hudson Yards to the Lower East Side. Her new building wasn't a glass tower. It was a pre-war walk-up with creaky floors, uneven brickwork, and a fire escape that rattled when the wind blew. It was imperfect. It was exactly what she wanted. Elena unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was filled with the chaotic potential of a new beginning. She walked over to the far wall where she had hung a single painting, the first acquisition for her new life. It wasn't a minimalist monochrome piece like the ones Julian had insisted on. It was a large, textured oil painting by a young artist she had discovered in Brooklyn. The canvas was thick with impasto, layers of dark blue and violent orange, clashing and bleeding into one another. It was messy. It was emotional. It showed the brushstrokes, the errors, the struggle of creation. Elena stood before it, holding a mug of tea that was too hot against her palms. She took a sip, letting the heat burn her tongue slightly. For 5 years, she'd been a curator of a museum life. Don't touch, don't feel, don't mess up the display. Now, standing in her drafty apartment with the sounds of city traffic leaking through the window, she finally felt solid. She wasn't Mrs. Sterling anymore. She wasn't the other woman. She was just Elena. And for the first time in a long time, the silence around her wasn't empty. It was waiting to be filled.